Hi, it's Pastor Kerry here, and I am with my colleague and pastor friend, Jonathan Bilima. I already ruined your last name there.
Oh,
It's,
yeah.
I guess we're not that close of friends if I butchered your last name, huh? So,
Everybody does it. I mean, there are people I've known for all my life that still don't get it right.
yeah.
So,
Well, that's okay
uh,
because people are always butchering my first name. And so I just had my car worked on, and that they called me Terry. And so,
uh,
and I have plenty of stories about it, but I'm just not going to bore you with that type of stuff.
yeah.
And so, hey, tell me a little bit about the Jonathan Bilima story. Is that you're a pastor at a church now, but you always haven't been a pastor. And what kind of brought you to the place where you're at today in your life?
Yeah. So I was raised in the Seventh Adventist Church, and
Mm,
for those that are familiar with the Seventh Adventist Church, it's definitely a different expression of religion within the body of Christianity. Some would go to the extreme of saying that it is an all-out cult, and others would say that it has some divergent understanding of theology. But otherwise, in
yeah.
any case, without going deep into that, um, I grew up very religiously, but I had zero relationship with God, even though my father was a pastor, taught in their seminaries and all that. And ended up going to school in Nebraska. There, I started a business and grew the business quite large. It had over 100 employees, and one of my key employees was a part-time Baptist minister, and
Okay.
he approached me one day and said, "Hey, I really like the way you run your business, and I'm curious to find out more about your religion. So I'm going to start coming to church with you." Now, what he didn't know is that I wasn't really attending church on a regular basis. But when I heard that he was a part-time Baptist minister, I was like, wow, this is going to be good to convert him to the Adventist faith.
Mm.
He'll start worshiping on the right day and stop eating bacon, and we will, get this guy on the right track. And
Yeah.
so he started coming to church with me on a regular basis. And in that during that time frame, about 3 months went by, and he one day came up to me and said, "You know what? You guys are some amazing people, but brother, bacon is the flavor of grace, and you guys don't know anything about it." so so that led to several arguments and debates, and in me arguing and trying to win an argument, trying to make sure that I knew what his argument would be before he would even bring it up. I
Yeah.
started reading the Bible more objectively without the roadmaps to arrive at our doctrine. And during that process, I discovered the gospel, the good news
Yeah.
that God is not just a list of rules and regulations, but rather He is trying to bring us into His family, trying to make
Yeah.
us family, trying to make us His children, and loving us beyond what we could even imagine. So
Mhm.
that changed my life
Yeah.
completely. And
So you were talking about essentially discovering the gospel and
yeah,
how that captured your heart. And it's my understanding that the church that you lead now would be what space would you kind of put yourself in? Community church, or do you have kind of like a space where you'd say that this is where we are doctrinally or what we're about?
we're a we're mutts in a sense, We're a non-denominational
Yeah.
evangelical church. We want to make the main thing, the gospel.
Yeah.
God saves. We respond to Him, to His love,
There you go.
and we come to a knowledge of Him through His initiation,
Yeah.
and then He equips us to be ministers who go out and proclaim His good news on this planet as we await for His kingdom.
Yeah. So now
Amen.
help me to understand because I might be confused here. That um, uh, did you come to America as a child, or were you born in America?
I was born in Southeast Africa,
Okay.
Zimbabwe. Only lived there for 1 year. Then I went to my parents. My parents are Malawian, and so and I'm Malawian too. So We lived in Malawi till I was 8 years old. Then we moved to the United States.
So
So
you were age 8 when you came to the United States.
exactly
Yeah.
8 years old.
Where did you
Small
where
town,
did you end up?
small town in Michigan called Berrien Springs.
Okay.
Only claim to fame was that Muhammad Ali lived right down the road from my parents' house. Other than that, Berrien Springs is there's not much else there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how about for you, essentially coming from Malawi as a child and then ending up in North America?
Yes.
Is that how about for you? What was your? Did you have experiences of racism and bigotry once you came to America? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. And I have too many stories to tell
Yeah.
about that. It was always in your face. I come to America and I'm in the third grade. I remember in the third grade, my teacher, Mrs. Crapsey, singled out the 4 black kids in the class. It was myself, a kid named Tim Chandler, and Daniel Williams. I can't remember Boyd Main, and I can't remember the other guy. But she called us the 4 bad boys. And so here we are, singled out, and she literally referred to us the 4 bad boys. And anything that went wrong, the first people that she looked for was, "Where are the 4 bad boys? They did it." And that kind of puts you on a trajectory to project what's being projected on you.
Yeah.
To put that type of behavior out there.
Mm-hmm.
Then there was a secondary situation that was also taking place, in that I also had to deal with the identity of who am I? Am I African or am I African American?
Yeah.
And my parents definitely wanted me to assimilate to American culture. So, and you're trying to find a place for yourself. And so within the construct of being from a different country, but black, you have the conflict of who are you, So I can tell you many stories of white teachers, principals who would, sit you down, not knowing who I was or where I was coming from, assuming that I was African American, Black American, and say, "Hey, you watch out for those African kids. They're no good. You're better than them. They come from the jungle." And then on the flip side, I remember a vice principal who literally said, "You're African. You're not like those Black American kids. And you're better than them." And so there was a lot of that. In terms of like interactions with police, that's been an interesting journey in of itself. My wife, on our first date, we got into a big argument about race, and she's Middle Eastern. Her family's from Syria.
Okay.
And she had never experienced any of these things that I'd experienced. And so on our first date, we're talking about different things that happen. And this is in Lincoln, Nebraska, where we went to college, and where I lived for many years. He said, "What you're saying can't be true. That doesn't happen to people." And so I was like, no, this is my life. That night, as I'm driving her back to her place, we get pulled over, and they separate us. And they are asking her, "Are you safe with that guy? Who is that guy? Has he done anything?" Trying to basically paint a story. As they're questioning me, they pulled, and like she literally came back to the car after it was all said and done. They stopped me for having, those little Alpine air
fresheners.
That was the reason why they stopped me. They said that was obstructing my view, and they wanted to check out the car. But they searched the car, questioned us, held us for 45 minutes, and then let us go. But she came back to the car crying. She's like, "I have never experienced that before." And I have dozens and dozens of of just strange experiences like that, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
in terms of in dealings with people who hold power and authority.
Gotcha.
And
Gotcha.
so,
So,
yeah,
what would you say would be the most egregious instance of bigotry or racism that you personally have dealt with, or do you feel that they're all just kind of, equally offensive?
I would say that the most egregious forms of racism are those that are not overt.
Yeah.
It's the subtleties. It's the quiet. It's the when you're in an environment where someone can really, really speak up to stop something, or um, and they don't,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
let it slide. I
Yeah.
think those are the worst ones. The ones that the racism that can be hidden is the most dangerous one.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
I actually prefer someone to show their cards.
Yeah. Gotcha.
Say, here's where I stand. Here's where we are. It's like good, as opposed to being in a situation where you know someone for years, and then just something that to relate to that. My youth pastor for many, many years, who had come to love and respect, and thought this man cared deeply for me. When my wife and I were getting ready to get married,
Mm-hmm.
he met with me and literally told me, um, "You're doing something very, very sinful and wrong
Hmm.
by marrying outside of your race."
Hmm.
And he was a person who I had admired for many years and thought greatly of him. And he basically told me, "You stay with your people and let her stay with her people."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that was devastating, because it was like, where is this coming from? Where did this all come from? You've been a person who's championed diversity in culture,
Yeah.
and now you're telling me this, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I'd say that the hidden prejudice and bias that you can't see, but because it's hidden, those individuals practice racism in a very unseen way.
Yeah. 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 So that hey, do you mind me just going off on a tangent for a moment?
Yeah,
And
absolutely, man.
yeah,
This is free.
that
No freestyle.
yeah. Well, after all, I'm a pastor.
Yeah.
Tangents are part of the job description. So,
Right.
but
Right.
that I worked in an all black church in Oakland when I
Hmm.
started. When my wife and I think when we were first married, I can't remember for sure if we were married. I think we were, and and that and so and then the area that I ended up working after that was very ethnically mixed, and made a lot
Hmm.
of friends of all a wide variety of colors. But
Right.
one of my black friends one day came down to visit me here in Riverside after we moved into Riverside, and I'll take you out to lunch. He only had like a day or even an afternoon to spend with me, and so we went
Hmm.
out and we went to Denny's. You know? And so when we went to Denny's, that we both placed our order, and the food just took forever to get to us. And I thought, the place isn't that busy. Come on, let's step it up a little bit. And so eventually the food came, and I said to him, I said, man, she is really a bad waitress.
Right.
And he said, oh, I get that all the time.
Yeah.
And it dawned on me in that moment is that as a black person, he never knows for sure if the waitress is just a bad waitress or she's making some sort of subtle racial statement. You
Yeah.
know, that thought, in all honesty, has never crossed my mind when I went to a restaurant is the poor service due to the fact that I'm white? And of course, I
Right.
understand, the claims of white privilege and things of that nature. That's not really what this is about, or maybe. But what I'm saying is that I never, ever, ever thought of it. But I was thinking that as a black man, that he never knows.
Right.
He never knows if it is just the person's a jerk or if the person's a racist.
Right.
Not all jerks are racists,
But all racists are jerks.
Exactly. So, how about you? And what's your current take on the race situation that we've been facing here in America?
And I'll say that this is purely my opinion, because I'll not say that like I'm someone who's going to speak for the entire culture or people. I would say that the race situation in America is one that has to be addressed from a place of reconciliation, carefully.
Yeah.
Because the pain is deep.
Yeah.
And racism does not just affect Black people. It has deeply impacted white people and anyone who's an American.
Yeah.
It's deeply impacted all of us, because even in a situation where someone is an abuser and the abused, when they come out of that relationship, that toxic relationship that has history, and you as a counselor know this, they both need to go through a process to heal from that. So we have America, which for hundreds of years had slavery. Some folks will say, some people get upset when they hear Black Lives Matter and they say all lives matter.
Yeah.
Well, we need to fully embrace and understand that when the founders of our country, our great country, declare that all men are created equal, their definition of all men did not include people of color. It only included people like them.
Yeah.
And so when more Americans understand that, yes, prophetically maybe they were speaking about what we have right now, all men being equal, but back then they weren't.
Yeah.
And there's we've inherited certain attitudes, and so the slaves are freed, but there's no process of repair that takes place for them, and there's no process of repair for those who dominantly used dehumanizing people, calling them three-fifths of a man, not recognizing them as their humanity in order to enact the abuse. You inherit those things, you inherit those attitudes. And an example that, or illustration I've heard used in a different instance, but I think it works this way, is sort of like, family traditions and family recipes of how you cook, you bake a cake.
Yeah. Yeah.
Every family has a different way of doing it, different seasoning, a different, process for it. And it's passed down. Well, this is how grandma made it. This is how mom made it. This is how I make it, because that's how she did it. Well, what if they had the recipe wrong? If they had the recipe wrong, you're now, what you think is perfect is really actually something that's broken. Oh, I apologize. What you think is perfect is actually a broken process. And so I think that there's a need for recognition that everyone needs repair in regards to race and how we work through it. So,
with that topic of repair, I would like to maybe open that up in a subsequent conversation, because I think that I don't want these visits to go too long, because I know when people watch things, they start to tune out.
Yeah.
You know? So, but I do want to circle back to that. If you're open to
Yeah.
having another conversation
Cool.
about this, let's talk just for a moment. And I don't think that we really have gotten to a lot of the things that where we can talk a little bit about the gospel approach to
Yeah.
racial reconciliation. But I do want to get there too.
Mm.
But for now, I think we got to get kind of lay some of the groundwork on some of this.
Yeah.
How about for you? Give me, like you say, you don't speak for everybody, but give me your take on the Black Lives Matter movement.
Mm. Black Lives Matter movement is a movement that can only be birthed when there's been a long history of broken systems, and whether one wants to say that there systemic racism exists or doesn't exist,
Mm-hmm.
the thing is that there are disparities
Yeah.
that do exist. They are we do experience the results of decisions that were made years ago, and we're now trying to work through all that.
Yeah.
And I'll say this. So when George Floyd was killed, let me go back. When Ahmaud Arbery was chased in a truck by those individuals that murdered him.
Yeah.
When I saw the video, Kerry, I immediately felt a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
I immediately the hairs on my arms stood up, and the reason was because I remembered between the summer of 8th grade and 9th grade, walking home,
Yeah.
and being chased in a truck by some white guys yelling "nigger" to me, and I literally had to jump off road to a place where they could not drive and run an alternate route home, scared for my life.
Yeah.
Because I did not know what was going to happen to me. So, and I've spoken to many people about that incident and how I felt about that. And you find out that your story about those types of situations are not just some unique once in a million story.
Yeah.
You get enough people around you, and someone will say, "Yes, I remember having a situation like that happen." So, Black Lives Matter. When things like that happen, there's so many people of color who say, "I know what that's like.
Mm-hmm.
That could have been me. That could have been my son. That could have been my uncle."
Yeah.
There's this knowing fear because you've been through that rises up. So I don't think that Black Lives Matter is saying, Black Lives Matter more than anyone else, but they're saying Black Lives Matter also. They matter too, and we need to place value on these on people. The organization, the movement Black Lives Matter, is not necessarily one that I think aligns with my Christian worldview, my kingdom worldview.
Yeah.
There's definite tenets, and if you want to know what someone believes and what they think, it's good for you to read what they publish about themselves and their stances.
Yeah.
And so the founders of Black Lives Matter have publicly declared, I think it's on their website even, that they are trained Marxists. And that's not something that lines up with a kingdom perspective or a Christian worldview from that standpoint. But the cry of Black Lives Matter is something that I think resonates with so many.
Yeah.
And when people saw George Floyd demonically murdered by Derek Chauvin, whether or not Derek Chauvin was doing it from a place of racism, it just brought up so much. I immediately, when that took place, my mind went to Rodney King.
Yeah.
My mind went to so many other instances that were public situations that took place. And then more recently, it went back to my own experiences with police
Mm-hmm.
and people who hold authority, have been put in positions of authority, and when they exercise it in an evil way. I remember more recently, just a couple of years ago, I was flying back from Australia, and I watched the NWA movie. NWA, the rap group that in the late 80s and early 90s had a very successful run.
Mm-hmm.
But one of their more popular songs was F, and I'm being polite, F the Police.
Yeah.
And so I watched that movie on the plane coming back from Australia, doing ministry out there. As I watched it, I remembered being a young man listening to those songs and watching the news when the CIA was after them, how the president at the time, I think it was Bush, was like, trying to get them banned for saying those things. But they were saying those things because of things that had happened in their life,
Yeah.
that happened in their experience. I land at LAX. And when I land at LAX, a friend of mine is there to pick me up. So he's pulling around, and I look over, there's two police officers, and they're watching me, and they've been looking at me the whole time. And so when my friend gets to the curb, I approach the car to start, entering the car.
Yeah.
And by that time, they're right next to me, and they tell the driver, keep going. And I'm like, oh, but I'm right here. He hasn't even stopped. He's not parked or anything. And like, we need to talk to you. And he had to circle twice. And the harassment, the question, the line, it brings, it makes you wonder, do other people endure and experience these things?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, or is this just merely happening because of my skin color and whatever assumptions that person has made?
Yeah.
Yeah. Eventually, of course, there was nothing going on, so they let me go. But it was like I got in the car and with tears in my eyes, because here I am watching a movie about a group that was popular 20 years ago that was crying the same thing, trying to bring awareness to the same thing. But here in the 2018, that was nothing. It seems as if not much has changed.
Yeah.
And it happens to me right there in LA. Yeah. So Black Lives Matter is something that, like, I think that people across the board, white people, need to take time to just say, you know what? If there's a little bit of smoke here, maybe there's a fire. Maybe there is something going on, and we need to listen, as opposed to dismissing the situation, because America has been dismissing some of these things for way too long.
Yeah. Well, I would be in agreement with you on the slogan Black Lives Matter. For me, as you mentioned earlier, is that the organization, when I really start to drill down into it, is that they back a lot of concepts that I'm talking about as an organization. They back a lot of concepts, and they have an agenda that just runs completely counter to my Christian principles. And so that's part of, I guess, the struggle that people have, that people who have given some thought to this, hopefully, is that the slogan Black Lives Matter is one that I can endorse. The organization Black Lives Matter is one that I think needs to be denounced. And so now, will good come from this? I don't know. From the organization, I still have a lot of kind of hesitancy about, or more than hesitancy. I think that it's an organization that's working, that is undermining race relationships in America. But how do we get there is probably the big question that we need to talk about. And so I don't think that we have time right now today to do that, but I would hope that if you're up for it, for us to have another conversation about some of these concepts of, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to see eye to eye.
Yeah.
But at least, as we spoke off camera, that part of what's important is learning to listen.
Yeah.
And maybe hear that that your experience as a black man in America is truly different than my experience as a white man in America. You know,
Right.
not completely different, but significantly different. And
Yeah.
so,
And to
yeah, if
your
you're
point,
up to for it, maybe we can circle back and do this again. And
absolutely. I just want to say something to your point there, that my
yeah,
experience and your experience may be different, but I the segmenting of those experiences, and I think also the some of the critical theory tenets of the Black Lives Matter organization
yeah,
tries to say that the experiences are vastly different,
hmm,
and there's only two classes, and it would put you as the oppressor
yeah,
and me the oppressed.
yeah,
And
exactly.
and I would say that from a biblical worldview of understanding of sin and how sin has affected humanity, every single person has experienced struggle and pain. It just looks different.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
if I sit here and say, because I'm a black man and you're a white man, you have never experienced the pain that I've experienced, it may be that we've experienced pain. It just has played out in different ways.
yeah,
Uh, uh, so it's good to address all those things, but I don't
mhm,
want us to be in a space where we're creating a division
yeah,
because of skin color,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah,
and American issues, because you go worldwide and this thing blows up even higher when you go to countries that have caste systems. It's
yeah,
it's
exactly.
just an American problem.
Yeah, and I appreciate your observation on that. I see the notion of critical theory behind uh, Black Lives Matter and other social justice movements,
Mm.
and the idea of oppressor oppressed. That the presupposition of that is setting up a divisive approach to understanding humanity rather than figuring out how do we reconcile humanity. And
Right.
I think that would be good for us to talk about next time and kind of dive in a little bit deeper. The concept of reconciliation, the concept
Yeah.
of reparations. How do we fix what has been going on in our culture for hundreds
Yeah.
of years, um, and what's some of the steps forward.
Absolutely.
So, but
I
I,
look
but I do appreciate your candor and your willingness to visit with me, and I hope that we can reconnect next time
Absolutely.
and go deeper
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
see what happens.
Absolutely, man.
All righty. Hey, thanks for taking some time out of your busy schedule to visit with me today, and I'm looking forward to our next chat.
Thank you.